What would happen if an old growth tree or an insect colony or an elephant would be able to hold down a stable digital identity, and you can attach a wallet to that identity, obviously, to be clear, not to the animal or tree itself, but to the kind of computational proxy of that. That started off as a kind of thought experiment, and then the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. asked me to write a paper, and that's when I sort of really came up with this idea of interspecies money.
All right, I am very excited for this episode. Have you ever wondered whether gorillas could have a crypto wallet? Or whether stablecoins could fuel the soil or the sun? These are concepts around the idea of interspecies money. And our guest, Jonathan Ledgard, is the person who has really concepted this idea, which is that the earth is a natural resource and provides labor for us. It may be in the sunshine it brings, it might be in the bees propagating flowers, it might be in how water feeds the plants around the world and the animals. So he has created this idea that interspecies money can exist, where the earth and its resources are in essence paid for the work that they give us. And I think it's a pretty fascinating concept when you think of the animals and the plants and the air and the soil and all of the things that really continue to keep us alive and keep us happy. He has a company called Tehanu, and Tehanu is really working on solving this challenge. They have an amazing project with the gorillas in Rwanda, and they are also now working on fruit bats and some other species. He's really sort of pioneering this idea that a small portion of the funds driven by tourism and resources that go into making businesses can come back to the resources themselves, with agents and AI, in essence, being the voice that tells us what they need and then manages the funds. So it's a fascinating concept that I heard about 6 months ago, and I've just been kind of obsessed with since. So after the break, come back, listen to our conversation with Jonathan Ledgard, and find out about what crypto the gorillas hold.
Midnight is a privacy-enhancing blockchain, introducing vital, programmable privacy and selective disclosure capabilities. It means dApps can allow users to control what information is revealed without putting sensitive data on-chain, allowing you to break free from the limitation of choosing between utility or privacy. We deserve more when it comes to privacy. Experience the next generation of blockchain that is private and inclusive by design. Break free with Midnight. Visit midnight.network/breakfree.
Welcome back. We are here with Jonathan Ledgard. Jonathan is the CEO of Tehanu, which is a company and really an initiative that I've been fascinated with for a while now. We spoke months ago, but it's really this concept of interspecies money that just has rolled around my head for quite a long time since we met Jonathan. So I would love for you to just tell our audience, what is interspecies money? What is Tehanu? What are you guys working on? And how can we help save the planet?
Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, well, if we just sort of get going with the basics, I think most of the audience is quite familiar with the position with which we are leaving other species on the planet. We're facing a sixth mass extinction event for other species. I mean, I'm in my mid-50s, and in my lifetime, we've lost 50% of the life forms on the planet. I'm based here in Africa, and Africa's population is going to double in the next 20 to 30 years. And it's going to double particularly in rural areas where people don't have many jobs and where people are living off the land. So if you kind of zoom out to the macro position, we really are living in an age of great risk if you don't happen to be a human. So, and we haven't even talked about political insecurity or climate change risk and so on. It's just like the competition between other species and humans. So that's obviously the starting point, and it gives us a sense of urgency in our mission. What we started to understand several years ago, my background, I worked in the Economist newspaper for a lot of my career. And then I flipped into technology about 10 years ago, mainly in robotics and artificial intelligence. And it's sort of going through a lot of digital identity projects for humans in quite four areas. When we talk about, is it possible to be a really poor person, not to have any electricity, but to have a wallet on your mobile phone, and to transact small payments on your mobile phone? That 10 years ago, that would have been a fantasy. Now, here in Kenya, it's like 93, 94% of the population are transacting most of their money that way. And in India is the same, with the UPI system there is now pushing several $1 trillion a year through mobile phones. And I had an epiphany about four years ago when I was in a village in South Sudan. And I thought, well, what would happen if mobile money doesn't stop in the last hut in the village? What if it continued on into nature? What would happen if an old growth tree or an insect colony or an elephant would be able to hold down a stable digital identity, and you can attach a wallet to that identity? Obviously, to be clear, not to the animal or tree itself, but to the kind of computational proxy of that. That started off as a kind of thought experiment. And then the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. asked me to write a paper. And that's when I sort of really came up with this idea of interspecies money. And ever since then, I've been sort of tap dancing at the edge of the DeFi crypto space, because there's a lot of interesting thinkers in that space. And I hope we can sort of dig in this conversation, talk about stable coins, and talk about treasuries and how they might work, and the potential for building this new layer. But essentially, in the end, interspecies money is just the literal idea that another species can hold an identity. With that identity, they can hold a wallet. And then the really cool bit, which is using artificial intelligence to infer simple interests that species might have. And we just wrapped a couple of weeks ago, the phase one of the project, which was, if you look at it in one way, you would say it's a bit Sesame Street. It's a bit, as a starting point. But on the other side, we actually worked with the central bank and the Ministry of Finance in Rwanda with a mountain gorilla. And we actually managed to transact some payments through the Solana chain, was right in the middle of that payment architecture. But we managed to have micropayments go from the proxy of these mountain gorillas to the mobile phones of rangers, trackers, veterinarians who were, let's say, serving the interests of mountain gorilla.
Yeah, when we were talking, what seemed fascinating is the idea that the mountain gorillas in Rwanda, I know you're working on a new project with fruit bats, but the idea that they can't speak for themselves in terms of what they need, but really the data shows us often what they need. And if they could participate in the financial economy, then we could allocate funds to help them in areas that in essence the data is telling us is important, or the AI is giving us the voice for. The idea of interspecies money really was astounding when I was reading about it, just because I thought the area that you talked about is the amount of tourism, for example, that the gorillas generate in Rwanda that they don't participate in. And we know what it's like to be extractive and not be included in the crypto industry, which is TradFi has done a lot of. So I also really resonated with that idea that we should be a participant in the ecosystem itself, in the same way that, in crypto, you can stake your coins against helping the network be healthier. Why can't the gorillas, in essence, do the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it very well, Sam. If we want to use crypto language, we really are talking about staking, say, like, you join the conversation as an ancient life form or on planet Earth, cohabiting the planet with us. Obviously, a lot of people get confused by this idea or stressed by this idea, and people can be quite dismissive. But given that we have a lot of agentic AI, which is already able to hold and spend money, and that's pretty even even in traditional finance, there's a lot of money which is already being transacted in that way. And the AI is observing interests and is acting independently and autonomously of humans. So to me, I would throw the argument back and say, well, it's a little bit crazy that we're giving AI the ability and machine intelligence the ability to participate. And of course, I think we'll see over the next decade that they will, that will accelerate to very large sums of money, and not to include the other forms of life on the planet who actually desperately need it, And in these communities that I'm mostly working in, I'm not saying interspecies money could not work in West Virginia. Maybe it could, but it's most likely to be of utility in the poorer bits of the planet where other species are in competition with humans. And there, you can actually look at this as a different kind of addressing system. So the value is passing through the animal or the other species, and it's the local community or agents in that community which are providing simple services to the species. And they're getting kind of almost a task rabbit kind of model, if you're familiar with that platform, where simple tasks are put up. And you say, would you take a video of me? Would you take a genetic sample of my stool? Would you protect me in some way? Would you move the cows into another area? These are very, very simple tasks, which if they are repeated and rewarded, really you're creating a different kind of attention economy and you're creating a different kind of relationship. And I do believe that, and we've already seen it in these early stages of the work, that the power relationship, the conversation starts to change, because suddenly the other species is saying, hey, I might like X and Y, and I'll reward you for it, And I actually think the crypto space, I'll tell you a very small anecdote from the crypto side, because I'm a bit of a neophyte, I'm afraid, and your audience will baffle me with language and jargon and so on. But when I very first had this idea, it just so happened that Charles Hoskinson from the Cardano blockchain, he reached out to me and said he was traveling to Ethiopia. And since I was an Africanist, would I come along on that trip? So actually, some of the very, very first inklings of what interspecies money would be was hacked out over a chessboard with Charles Hoskins, and I didn't know who Charles was at the time, but so it was kind of funny in retrospect.
Yeah, Charles, I'm sure he's an investor in bringing the dire wolves back to life. He's been involved in bioluminescent plants. He definitely has a desire to think of species a lot more expansively than I think the normal person does. That makes sense. You mentioned the TaskRabbit approach, which I thought also, again, super interesting, because if we look at the, you have on your website, extending the gig economy to life on Earth. If we look at the service that bees do, in both, some making honey and some might be helping to propagate flowers, and again, not being rewarded for the effort. How can we ensure that they continue to do the work that helps bring us honey and flowers that people are already paying for? It doesn't seem like a big stretch. What do you think is the barrier? Like, is it just capitalism? Like, what is it that gets in the way of people understanding that these natural resources should be funded, and maybe this is a novel way to do so?
I think there's two things. One, there's an imagination leap where the human actually has to cede some centrality. The human actually has to stand back and say, oh, actually, I'm going to give her a little bit of capital. We know from the most conservative financial estimates, which, endorsed by all the major accounting firms in the world and all the major central banks, we know that the services that nature provides is, in excess of $50 trillion a year, which is a nonsensical sum. We can't even begin to calculate that, but that's over half of the world economy is directly dependent upon these nature services, And yet we have not developed a financial market which actually even begins to recognize that, even in the tens of billions of dollars, And so there is a power thing, and then there's there's a kind of cold start problem on the financial market. And of course, you've probably spoken to some sort of refi people in the crypto space. And I think they've really struggled despite some pretty elegant, sophisticated architecture, but they've struggled to sort of plug in. Given if you look at something, this is a bit of a facile example, but if you looked at like ApeCoin, I often think about this. I'm working with mousy gorillas. We may work with orangutans and bonobos and other great apes, and obviously other species as well. But if we just take the great apes, I mean, the amount of money which is put into the entirety of great ape preservation is fractional to what is held in ApeCoin. So literally have like a picture of an ape coin, and then obviously the board Ape Yacht Club. There is something a little bit twisted there, and but that also weirdly makes me very optimistic because I think we know from research that 30, maybe as much as 50% of humans are biophiliac. Like that's to say, if you drop them in the woods with birdsong and so on, if you show them in gorilla, they're going to get very, very excited, And that means to me that there is a market out there where people are ready to receive and ready to engage. And then the further thing I would say in this, Sam, is that in my conversations the last couple of years, the people who have been most excited and interested by the idea of interspecies money are the people who are the most conservative financiers, so say central bank guys, reinsurance industry, people holding quite conservative pension funds like, teachers' pension funds and this sort of thing. And you think, okay, why is that? It's because they've actually run the numbers on risk of the collapse of these services that nature is providing, these other species providing. It's existential risk to them. And there, I think we get into a very interesting territory in the crypto space with stable coins. Now, I haven't quite mapped this out at the moment, but it seems to me that if you would have on US dollar coin or Tether or one of the other large stable coins, I've had these conversations with Cello and their economists there. If you had a kind of voluntary life version of Tether, you say a life mark Tether, no one's forcing you to take that Tether, right? You can have your Tether, but if you had a Tether which maybe had 10% of its value staked in interspecies money, which is actually directly, working for preservation of other species, maybe there are ways, new economies that can take off that way. Now, I would be very hesitant to lecture or especially hector your audience on exactly how that could happen, but it seems to me that if very conservative financiers are saying, hold on, no, we need to protect these species, that is the future economy, then it seems to be like in the crypto space, which is obviously much more sophisticated and it's actually building the new layers, building the new economy, building the new ways of distributing value. For me, I just lay out that challenge to the community and say, hold on, can we actually engage with this idea? And the one thing I'm a wee bit cautious of is the speculative elements. So I think we had this conversation in the past, just tokenization, but you don't want the other species to become assets class. It seems to me that's not ethical, sound, and it probably would burn out very, very quickly.
But at least, Jonathan, if you think of the idea that effort and time and joy have value, then one can see the concept that says some fraction of a percentage or some something set aside to protect that. Even when we look at all these countries that are getting involved in crypto treasuries and putting some of their own economies on chain, I remember having a conversation with the Rainforest Foundation where they just said, hey, if we had taken a lot of our donations in Bitcoin and stable coins and then had been able to put that through both the rise in value of those, but also just the staking mechanism, it would have helped them sustain longer. And so they wouldn't have had to need as much money. So I don't think it's that foreign a concept. It's just getting it to the right people. My last question for you, Jonathan, is with Tehanu, is this something where you are looking at fruit bats and you're looking at gorillas and maybe you're looking at plants and or bees to do your next projects, or are you building a foundation for other people to be able to recognize and utilize the tools you're building to do the same?
Yeah, I think it's a wee bit of both, so what you want to see for the next 2 or 3 years is raise a little bit more finance, obviously build out the AI team and the science team and the economics solve, and then by that point, you really, really want to have a platform which is open for business, right? So some gentleman in Mexico who's protecting a certain frog can upload his frog, and the principles of the identity, question of the frog, the services that the frog might need. Where I think it gets very exciting is what we've already seen from our AI inference systems is as you hand out these simple tasks, you will see an improvement on the next generation of tasks, if that makes sense, right? So it should be a dynamic system which self-improves over time. But I think your point is very valid that in the end, you want to think of this as a digital public infrastructure play. You want to think of it as something where large communities are coming together. Obviously, not everything will work, but if most of it works most of the time, and then you can handle the game theoretic challenges of human manipulation and so on, then I think you have something which is very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jonathan, I know folks can reach you at tehanu.io. We'll put the links in our show notes and show some people where to contact you. I definitely feel like there is a lot of both chains and developers who are passionate about the work that you're doing. They just need to know more about it. So I'm really happy that you spent some time with us today, and hopefully we'll see you soon and that the species you're working with will be thriving.
Thank you very much, Nam. I really appreciate your time, and it's great. Really, really enjoyed it.